Tehillat Adonai Yadaber Pi V'Yvarech Kol Basar Shem Kodsho Le'olam Va'ed V'Anachnu Nevarech Ya Me'ata V'Ad Olam Hallelujah. We continue with the private Amidah on page 3A or 3B through page 9. We continue with Aleinu on page 10. Sorry, page 11. Aleinu l'shabeach Adon hakol ateit gedola liyotzer bereshit shelo asanu kigoyei ha'aratzot velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama shelo sam chalkeinu kahem v'gor aleinu k'chol hamonam v'anachnu koreim u'mishtachavim u'modim Lifnei melech malchei amlachim hakadosh baruch hu Shunot hashamayim v'yosei haaretz v'mashav yikaro b'shamayim mima'al v'al haaretz v'al haaretz mitachad Emimokenu episode. כי המלכות שלך היא עולמי תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך. אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. If you can unmute yourself, you may do so for Kaddish Shalem on page 12. Yitgadah
I'll call Yisrael, Dimru Amen. We'll say Shalom, 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 I'll call Yisrael, Dimru
Shalom Aleinu, V'al Yisrael.
Shalom Aleinu.
Amen.
I'll call Yisrael, Dimru Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Lauren, for leading us in Minhah. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. It is 6:09. We are live streaming still. So here we go. I think this is what I'm supposed to do. Everybody can see me, I think, on their big screen now. So what the deal is, Danielle has made me, or is going to make me the host. And it's a little bit early. We said that we would start the tikkun at 6:15. So while we're waiting, I'm happy to talk about whatever anybody wants to talk about.
So Rabbi, are we having sessions tomorrow on Saturday?
This evening we're doing learning, and then we're going to learn for the tikkun this evening, and then we're going to have Mariv this evening, and then tomorrow morning at 7:30. Tomorrow morning at 9:30, and Shabbat morning at 9:30, we will be live streaming services. And I can, just while we're talking about it, right? So here's our webpage. So if you go to our webpage, you can see the whole webpage here. And then to join our virtual minyanim, just push on that button. This gives you directions for streaming the services, and there's directions for Siddur downloads, and then connecting online, and so forth, and also a lot of stuff if you want to try to set your computer to turn on automatically. Not sure if that'll work for everyone, but depending upon what kind of system you have, that may be possible. And then for Shabbat, if you go to right here on the beginning where it says our festival Mariv service will be live streamed here beginning at 8:30. This space is a player. So you can go to our website, and then on the front page of the website, you can see where the player will be. And if you press, it should just start. When we start at 8:30, the live stream will be from here. And that will be also on Shabbat, on Friday and on Shabbat morning for Yom Tov. You can also, if you follow the link that was sent to you in the email, that should send you to this page too. It's on this page, and it's also on the pages for I think it's let me see if it's here. No.
Daily services.
It's here on the pages for daily services, right? So if you go to daily services where it says coming soon here, that's where the player is. And so when we do the live stream, that should turn on. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Been doing a lot of teaching about this. Other questions?
I know.
We still have 2 more minutes before I'm formally going to start with our learning. Let's see. There we go. Okay. All right. I'm going to put in the chat the link to the text that I will be using this evening for my teaching on the Tikkun. So that's now in the chat. You should be able to see it on your screen. And it should also... I'm going to ask everyone to please mute yourselves. I'm just going to mute everyone for right now. That'll make it easier. Okay. All right. We still have 1 more minute before we formally start, so I'm just going to wait a moment. Okay. Welcome everyone to All Access Beth Tzedec. This evening, we are privileged to have 3 different sessions of learning that we'll share together. I will be starting us off, and then at 7:15, you have the option of joining one of 2 other sessions that will be presented this evening. What I thought we would do this evening is, first and foremost, I want to start with a reminder of Zoom etiquette. When we're learning together and praying together, it's really important that everybody keep their microphones muted unless they have something that they want to say to contribute to the conversation. You can unmute yourself and participate. You can add a question in the chat. You can raise your hand and I will see it and then call upon you, and we can operate that way. But that's really the basic etiquette, is to stay muted so that sometimes we have background noise that perhaps we're not aware of, somebody else in the house, or maybe even an ambulance going by, a dog barking, and all of that noise carries into the Zoom and everybody hears it. And so just as a way to be respectful of everybody's kavanah, we come together and we ask you to do that. This evening, I'm going to be showing some texts and conversing with you about paradigm shifts. and how the Jewish people have responded in the past to paradigm shifts, and to make the not so subtle analogy to the paradigm shift that we're currently going through. There are plenty of people who have noted before that the coronavirus pandemic is remaking our notions of community and the way in which we connect to each other. For example, we're studying this tikkun in our homes, dialing in on Zoom or joining us on a live stream via Facebook or YouTube. And Beth Tzedec, for the first time, will be live streaming our services on Shabbat and Yantiv over the course of Shavuot as well. Not to mention just the repurposing, reconnection, reminder of core values, such as human beings were not made to be alone. It's not good for a person to be alone. A person can't live by bread alone either. We need human contact. And I know all of us are craving that. And though we are doing our part to maintain physical distancing, the longer this goes on, the harder it becomes. And so we have to use technology. We have to be mindful of the way in which we engage in walking and in the neighborhood of others, because not only do we not want to risk for ourselves perhaps contracting the virus, but we also don't want to inadvertently pass it on to somebody else. The virus has rewritten the rules of the economy. It has shown warts in our social services system, especially in nursing homes and assisted living homes. It's shown warts in our preparedness, that perhaps we haven't fully learned the lessons of previous crises, as we see the lack of preparedness for this one. And hopefully we'll continue to learn as an outcome of this for the future. But clearly there are some things that are going on now, and we don't yet fully understand what they will be, although many experts and pundits have certainly written about it. There are things going on now that will have a lasting impact on the future of our societies, both in terms of the general world and community in which we live, in the city of Toronto, of course, in Canada and around the world, and certainly in the Jewish world. There are certain trends that have been accelerating over the years whose impact and outcomes are now here to stay. So what I thought we would do this evening is we would take a look at the last great paradigm shift that took place in the Jewish world. And that was the shift from biblical to rabbinic tradition, from Israelite religion. I'm using this in a historic anthropological sense, from Israelite religion, which was the religion of the Torah, to rabbinic religion, which is the Judaism that we have experienced in our own lives, is the Judaism that has really guided Jewish people for the last 2,000 years. Israelite tradition is also a tradition that was thousands of years old. This is the holiday of Shavuot, in which we celebrate and remember what tradition calls Zman Matan Toratenu, the time of the giving of our Torah, the time that, if we use the Torah's counting of time, took place sometime around 1000 BCE and continued up until the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70. So at least 1,000 years of Jewish history from the time of the giving of Torah to the destruction of the Second Temple. And then you can go back even further in terms of its oral history. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob go back even farther. And if you take the Torah at its word, 10 generations from Abraham to Noah, and then 10 generations from Noah to Adam. And then who knows how long a Yom Echad, a single day was in the telling of time. So the Torah, by its own admission, is a religious tradition that is thousands of years old. So we're talking about an ancient tradition that we have, but there are substantial differences between Israelite religion and between rabbinic religion. So let me ask you to start with, what are some of the key characteristics, the defining characteristics of Israelite religion, of the religion of the Torah? Someone like to unmute themselves and give us an answer?
Sacrifice?
So the sacrifice, for sure. The korbanot. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
The entire temple service, the
entire
the
temple service. Right. So the Israelite tradition, it starts with multiple altars that are built in places in which Israelites, the tribes, our ancestors, encountered God. Jacob is fleeing to Haran from his brother Esav. He stops on the border between Israel, Eretz Israel, and Haran. He has a dream of a sulam, of a ladder connecting the earth to heaven and heaven to earth, and angels going up and down. And he wakes up in the morning and says, God was in this place, v'anochi lo yadati, and I didn't know. And he built an altar. But then after the Yitziat Mitzrayim and after Matan Toratenu, after the giving of Torah, the worship becomes more centralized first in the Mishkan, in a tabernacle, and then centralized in the temple and the Beit Mikdash, and that was there at the altars of the ancient world that our ancestors would worship God through korbanot, through sacrifices. They would give gifts of their field, gifts of their flock, and they would be sacrificed to God. And it seems also, if you read Leviticus, and I've spoken about this before, even this year, that what God wants is the reach nichoach. God wants the pleasing aroma. God wants a barbecue, as if God has a nose. Of course, tradition interprets reach not as reach, but as ruach. What God really wants is the ruach nichoach, is the spirit by which the person offering the sacrifice brings it. What's another characteristic of Israelite tradition?
Priests were running everything.
The priests were running everything. I recognize that voice. Thanks, Harold. The priests were running everything. There was an intermediary. You had Kohanim. You had priests. You had Leviim, who were the intermediaries between the person, between the Amcha, between the person, the average person, and God. And so they didn't own property. They benefited by a portion of the offerings that people would provide, and they were the intermediaries. And so the temple and the Kohanim and the Leviim, that was the centralized structure of Israelite tradition. There was a centralized shrine, there was a caste system, and people would bring their korbanot, they would bring their offerings to worship God, to karov, literally. That was the way in which people would approach God. All of that changed with the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70. What were the causes of that change? Steve Tanny, I see you've raised a hand. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, because it seems to me that the Israelite tradition had another important feature that we have omitted, and that's the role of the prophet.
Very good. I think that bears mentioning. The prophet was also was alongside of the king, and kind of represented the voice of God in the public square. So that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that, Steve. That's an important point. But all that, certainly the role of the prophet started diminishing after the towards the end of the Second Temple period, and with the destruction of the temple, we see that it changed wholesale. Now the tradition tells us why it is that the temples were destroyed. These are common understandings and texts, and as we get into it, I want to start with the bracha for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has commanded us with your commandments and commanded us regarding the busyness, the study and living of Torah. The reasons given for the Talmud of the destruction of the temple come from Tosefta continues with a discussion of the sins of the Jewish people over the generations. What were the reasons the first temple was destroyed? It was destroyed due to the fact that there were three matters that existed in the first temple: idol worship, forbidden sexual relations, and bloodshed, meaning that Bnei Israel, the Israelites, were engaged in idolatry, they were engaged in forbidden sexual relations, and they were engaged in murdering each other and senseless bloodshed. But then, so why was the second temple then destroyed? And the Tosefta points out that during the second temple period, people seem to be more engaged in Torah study, in the observance of mitzvot, and in gimilut chesed and acts of kindness. And yet, so, it's not that they did not perform the sinful acts that were performed in the first temple. Why was the second temple destroyed? And the answer that it was given, this is what many of us know, because especially those of us that are engaged in Tisha B'Av services, why was the second temple destroyed? For Sinat Chinam. There was wanton hatred during that period. And what the Talmud wants to say here is that the sin of Sinat Chinam is equivalent to the transgressions of idolatry, forbidden sexual relationships, and bloodshed. And the Talmud wants to connect the destruction of both temples to each other. And so that's really what it's doing. Does anybody know the story that is the primary example that's given for Sinat Chinam, for hatred, as to why the second temple was destroyed?
Kamsa and Bar Kamsa.
Right. And what's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa?
Not everybody got invited to the party.
No, it's not that not everybody got invited to the party, but when he showed up, he was kicked out, right? So, Kamsa's having a party. I'm sorry, somebody's having a party, and he invites, and he's good friends with Kamsa, and his servant inadvertently invites Bar Kamsa, right? It's like, you invited Jane Smith instead of Joe Smith, right? So Bar Kamsa shows up, and the host of the party doesn't want him there. Bar Kamsa doesn't want to be embarrassed. So Bar Kamsa says, I'll pay for my plate. Just don't kick me out. And the host says, no, I don't want you here. It's Kamsa who's my friend, not you, Bar Kamsa. Get out. To which Bar Kamsa says, don't throw me out. I don't want to be embarrassed. I'll pay for half of the party. And the host says, no, get out of here. Bar Kamsa responds, I'll pay for the whole party. Just don't throw me out. And the host says, no, get out of here. And Bar Kamsa not only is embarrassed that he's thrown out of the party, but even more so, he becomes enraged that none of the Jewish leaders that were present at that party stood up to argue his case, or to say, come on, let him stay. He's going to pay for his plate. Don't make a big deal. Show some chesed, some kindness, and so forth. But the host hated Bar Kamsa so much that he threw him out. And even more so, according to the Torah, there was no chesed. There was no kindness that was shown even by any of the leaders there. So Bar Kamsa, in a rage, leaves the party, and he goes and he tells a lie to the Romans. Goes to the Romans and he says, the Jews are sacrificing goats. They're blemishing the goats. They're being deceitful. They're messing with your sacrificial rites, and so forth and so on. And as a result of that, the Romans come and sack the temple. It's an amazing story of the importance of kindness, and what the rabbis say here in this text is really fascinating. That wanton hatred in some way, shape, or form is like the outcome of these other things. It includes idolatry, forbidden sexual relations, which is ultimately not being able to modulate one's urges and bloodshed, and that's why the temples are destroyed. Now, there's a context that we have to understand here as well. This was a time of great change in society. The Romans were on the march and were occupying, conquering most of the world, the known world at that time, and they were bringing into that world their knowledge and their culture and so forth, and that was competing with Israelite tradition. And we see that there were all sorts of sects, S-E-C-T-S, that were emerging at that time. We had we have the Pharisees who became the rabbis, the Sadducees who were the temple priests. You had the Essenes, the early Christians, and many more that we know of. That this was a period of great change that was happening anyway, and as a result of that, it's not surprising that you had this conflict between the Israelites and the Romans, and certainly the Israelites wanted to maintain what was sacred to them, what was familiar, what was historic, but the Romans, they did not tolerate rebellion very well, and when the Zealots rebelled, the Romans sacked the city and destroyed the temple. In the ancient world, when you destroy a city, and you automatically destroy its temple, because not only are battles in the ancient world between opposing armies, but they're also between opposing gods. Whichever god wins is the stronger god. My god is better than your god, so I sack your temple so that my temple can stand in its place. And so this was the context in which all this was going on, that the Romans, on their drive to conquer the world, were disrupting the status quo in every location that they conquered. And the Israelites, as we know this from 150, 200 years earlier with the Maccabees, the Israelites did not take to being conquered so well. The Romans, though, more than the Greeks, did not take to rebellion and really crushed rebellions thoroughly. And so you have all of this raw material that is going on as this is happening. It is a time of great disruption and change. Just very quickly, the temple's destroyed in 70. The Zealots on Masada commit suicide in 73. One of the things I always try to point out to people when I'm traveling to Israel and taking a group to Israel is think about what it would have meant if the zealots on Masada's response to conflict was the way in which Jews always responded, right? Had we martyred ourselves, we wouldn't be here today. And so Masada is a complicated story for us. On the one hand, we like it when the underdog fights back and doesn't give in. On the other hand, if we martyr ourselves, what comes after that? And we have this incredible Mishnah, this incredible notion of Yochanan ben Zakkai, who is smuggled out of Jerusalem in a coffin, right? Pay attention to the symbolism here. He's smuggled out of Jerusalem in a coffin, and he comes out of the coffin outside of the city walls and goes to Vespasian and says, I had a dream that you're going to be the emperor. To which Vespasian initially, says, well, if that's true, why didn't you come to me earlier? And then the message comes that the emperor had died and Vespasian becomes the emperor. And what is it that Yochanan ben Zakkai wants? He wants to establish a Beit Midrash, an academy in Yavne, right? These opposing images of martyrdom versus, you tell me, what's the symbolism of Yochanan ben Zakkai and the coffin? Somebody unmute yourself and answer the question. What's the symbolism?
Rebirth.
Resurrection, right? It's even more than rebirth, right? The Jews, this is, it's not such a big jump from Yochanan ben Zakkai coming out of a coffin and Jesus being, being renewed after having suffered on the cross, right? These are at the time, this notion of rebirth in the face of terrible crisis and trauma were common. So Yochanan ben Zakkai, that's Mechayei Metim. He's like being reborn, and in his going to Yavne and building the academy, building the Beit Midrash, all of Judaism is being reborn. Don't just take my word for it, but even before we get there, I just want to point out the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was the last great rebellion against Rome, 132 to 135. Bar Kokhba was considered to be the Mashiach, declared so by Rabbi Akiva. The Romans, there's a great book called The Rebellion That Shook the World. The Romans were really concerned about the Bar Kokhba rebellion. You have to remember that Israel is, I'm going to use a New Jersey metaphor, you'll forgive me. Israel is the New Jersey Turnpike of the Middle East. It is the main thoroughfare from Asia Minor to Egypt, where all the trade happened. In the US, the New Jersey Turnpike is the main connector of Washington, DC to New York. And so whoever controls that road controls trade. And so the Romans didn't want the news of a second Israelite rebellion to lead to rebellions throughout the rest of the empire. And they didn't want the Israelites to delay or defer the profits that could be had by trade. So they totally crushed the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And one of the reasons why the Mishnah gets written down by Yehuda HaNasi 50, 100 years later is because so many people died, the lessons of the Mishnah of the rabbis would have been forgotten. So they have to write it down. So it gets codified in order to preserve it as a part of this paradigm shift, which comes from the circumstances of Rome being a disruptive force in the world, especially in the Middle East. And with the Bar Kokhba rebellion, it becomes clear to the Israelites that there's going to be no return to the temple, and therefore no return to temple worship, to the korbanot, to the roles of the kohanim, and so forth and so on. So what the rabbis do is two things. One is they maintain the hope of return, and so they preserve all of the acts in the Mishnah and then later in the Talmud, all of the acts, all of the instructions of temple worship, so that should Mashiach come, should Rome be destroyed, should Israel be able to rise again with the third temple of Beit Mikdash HaShlishi, the community will maintain the memory of how to function in Israelite tradition, in the religious tradition of the Torah. But at the same time, they recognize that that's only going to come when Mashiach comes. And who knows when Mashiach is going to come. So therefore, what are we going to do in the interim? How are we going to take these values from Torah and maintain their relevancy in our lives in the here and now? And so the Mishnah, at the same time, preserves the how-to of the sacrificial cult of the Beit Mikdash and presents a new blueprint, a new roadmap to how one maintains the covenantal relationship with God in different ways. The home becomes the Beit Mikdash Ma'at, becomes the little temple. When we have challah, 2 chalot on our tables on Shabbat and on Yom Tov, that's one of the oldest continuous rituals that we have connecting us to the temple. But everything gets reinterpreted for the home and for the Beit Midrash, for the academy. And whereas there's no job now for the Kohanim, other than perhaps the first Aliyah and Duchening, there is now work for the rabbis, who are preacher, teacher, and judge, Dayanim, in Israel. I see 2 people have raised their hands. Steve, is that still your hand up from previous? Steve Tanny, is that your hand up from previous? Okay, so that's from previous. Anam Kara, I see you have a hand up. Do you have a question or a comment?
A question. I'm wondering if the Torah or the commentators envisage an end to this ongoing thread of sacrifice. In my understanding of it is that there's a place of ego in the ongoing connectedness or attempt to connect with God. Is there anything that envisages a time before Mashiach when that is a more direct relationship without ego?
I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, it feels like sacrifice that is a predicator of connectedness with God. That without some form of sacrifice ensemble, there doesn't seem to be able to be the connectedness. So I'm wondering if there is envisaged a time without that intermediary step.
So there is, and in fact, that's a perfect transition to what we're doing. The rabbis, the rabbis have to establish their credibility and their authority from the Torah. And so, while we're here, why don't you read this first text, which is from Pirkei Avot, the very first Mishnah or teaching from Pirkei Avot, and you see it plain as day as how the rabbis do that. Anam Kara, you want to read this, or should I call on someone else?
Sorry, didn't understand. Moses received the Torah at Sinai and transmitted it to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets the men of the great assembly. They said 3 things: be patient in the administration of justice, raise many disciples, and make a fence around the Torah.
So there's a couple important points to be had here. First of all, when it says Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, the rabbis are not just talking about the written Torah. They're also talking about the oral Torah. And the reason you know that is the word umisara l'Yoshua. Misara is to pass something by hand, right? So this is an oral tradition that is now being passed down. And notice where it ends up, right? It's like Torah goes from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to the elders, from the elders to the prophets, and from the prophets to the men of the great assembly, to the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was made up of rabbis. And the Sanhedrin said three things: be patient in justice, raise many disciples, meaning raise many students, many rabbis, va'asu sayag l'Torah, and make a fence around the Torah. This Mishnah is establishing the authority of the rabbis. And though we read it many, many times, and sometimes we gloss over it, but it's really an extremely bold statement. The rabbis are saying that there's not one, but two Torahs that were given at Sinai. And we, the rabbis, who are the descendants of the men of the great assembly, we have this job to ensure justice, to ensure more rabbis and disciples and leaders, and to establish the rules by which Torah is observed within our own environment. It's a brash statement, but it's not the only such statements that they make. Here's a text from the Talmud, from Makot. Do we have a volunteer to read it? Okay, no volunteers. I'm going to have to call on someone. Jerome Singer, would you unmute and read the text?
Okay. The Gemara relates another incident involving those sages. On another occasion, they were ascending to Jerusalem after the destruction of the temple. When they arrived at Mount Scopus and saw the site of the temple, they rent their garments in mourning, in keeping with halachic practice. When they arrived at the Temple Mount, they saw a fox that emerged from the site of the Holy of Holies. They began weeping, and Rabbi Akiva was laughing. They said to him, "For what reason are you laughing?" Rabbi Akiva said to them, "For what reason are you weeping?" They said to him, "This is the place concerning which it is written, and the non-priest who approaches shall die, and now foxes walk in it, and shall we not weep?" Rabbi Akiva said to them, "That is why I am laughing, as it is written, when God revealed the future of the prophet Isaiah, and I will take to me faithful witnesses to attest Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jeberachia." Now, what is the connection between Uriah and Zechariah? He clarifies the difficulty. Uriah prophesied during, where are we here? During the first temple period, and Zechariah prophesied during the second temple period, as he was among those who returned to Zion from Babylonia. Rather, the verse established that fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah is dependent on fulfillment of the prophecy of Uriah. In the prophecy of Uriah, it is written, "Therefore, for your sake, Zion shall be plowed as a field, and Jerusalem shall become rubble, and the Temple Mount as the high places of a forest, where foxes are found." There is a rabbinic tradition that this was prophesied by Uriah. In the prophecy of Zechariah, it is written, "There shall be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem." Until the prophecy of Uriah with regard to the destruction of the city was fulfilled, I was afraid that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled. As the two prophets are linked, now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah remains valid. The Gemara adds, the sages said to him, employing this formulation, "Akiva, you have comforted us. Akiva, you have comforted us."
Okay, a piece of Patty's cheesecake to anyone who understands this passage.
He's seeing prophecies being fulfilled.
Well,
Akiva does.
there's two prophecies that are being fulfilled here, right? What's Uriah's prophecy?
I don't remember.
that Israel, that the temple will be destroyed.
Yeah.
Right? That Jerusalem will be plowed as a field. Right? So so Uriah prophesies during the first temple period, and Zechariah during the second. So Uriah, and they linked them, the two of them, because Zechariah's prophecy is dependent upon the prophecy of Uriah's. So if the temple is destroyed and Uriah's prophecy comes true, then what's Zechariah's prophecy, which is there shall be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem, meaning that even after the destruction, there's still people sitting in Jerusalem, and they're getting older, meaning they're living. And so you have this the fox, which is the sign that the prophecies are coming true. And Akiva, why is Akiva therefore laughing?
Because he reads the cup half full. He sees the prophecy when the fox is in the fields. He sees that it's coming, that the redemption will come, that the tikkun will come.
And that's right. And that but now what's the subtlety of his point? What's the subtlety of his point?
For me, it's how you read it, how you're going to read this whole situation. The subtlety is how you read the fox, how you read the field, how you read somebody sees a fox in a field. There's two ways to read it, this situation, and one is with hope, and the other is in despair.
That's true, but what is it that's giving Akiva? What is it that's giving Akiva hope? Right? I mean, what's giving him hope?
Prophecy.
And what is he not bothered by?
The fox.
He's not bothered by the fox, and he's not bothered by the destruction of the temple.
The destruction.
He's not bothered by the
destruction. Is actually a point for renewal.
That's right.
They're crying because it's destroyed, and he's laughing because he sees prophecies that said we're going to come up from the grave and reestablish ourselves.
Exactly, and so therefore he's making it's subtle in the text, but it's profound in terms of its impact. He's saying that and we're going to see how the rabbis take this out and further, right? That what's emerging from the destruction is okay, because what is emerging, meaning Rabbinic Judaism, for which Akiva is a leader of, what's emerging is the fulfillment of a prophecy. Right? And then you see it, here's a text from the Avot de Rabbi Natan, which is a series of ethical sayings, this according to Rabbi Natan. Do we have a volunteer to read this? Anam Kara, you're raising your hand. Do you want to read or do you want to make a point?
No, I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
So am I understanding correctly that it's beyond simply a silver lining piece? There is always opportunity and hope?
My read of it is that it's not a silver lining piece, it's the fulfillment of prophecy. That it is nothing less than God's will that Rabbinic Judaism rise in the aftermath of the destruction of the temple.
Thank you.
Silver lining would be, more. You would still be more. Akiva's laughing instead. He's in a place of destruction, where he should be mourning, where he should be ripping his garments and putting ash on his head, and he should be mourning, but instead he's laughing. And he's laughing because what he sees, which is rabbinic Judaism, rising from those ashes as the phoenix, what he sees that is nothing less than the fulfillment of prophecy.
In this story, I don't see the word rabbinic in it. I just see the revival of Judaism. You're throwing in the word rabbinic. Why specifically rabbinic?
Well, so for Akiva, it's certainly the revival of Judaism. I'm throwing in the rabbinic only to make the point that rabbinic Judaism is different than Israelite tradition.
Yeah.
Rabbinic Judaism and Israelite tradition and Israelite religion are similar but different. Right? I mean, and rabbinic Judaism, to be authentic, has to tie its authority to the Torah. Otherwise, the people wouldn't have stood for it. But there was context and there was trauma that and it took place over a couple hundred years. Temples destroyed in 70. Bar Kokhba's in 130 ends 135. The Mishnah is not codified to 225, 250. So. Akiva's 135, so there's 100 years here. Hillel and Shammai are in the 150 BCE. So you have a rabbinic tradition that traces itself 300 years before it gets codified, and it's existing within all this other mud of transition. But for historical, political, religious, probably economic reasons too, the rabbis emerge, and the people find the rabbinic myth in the anthropological sense, right? I'm not contrasting myth and fact. That's a modern thing. Myth is a story of origin, of authority for a particular culture and community. So the rabbinic myth is that the oral Torah, for which they are the guardians of, goes back to Sinai. And now what we're going to see here is the more specific question to a more specific answer to a question that was asked earlier. Do we have a volunteer to read?
I will.
Paul, I see you waving your hand.
Okay. On acts of kindness. How so? It says, "For I desire kindness, not a well-being offering." The world was created from the very beginning with kindness, as it says, "For I have said that the world will be built on kindness and the heavens will be established on your faith." Once, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai left Jerusalem, and Rabbi Yehoshua followed after him, and he saw the holy temple destroyed. Rabbi Yehoshua said, "Woe to us, for this is destroyed, the place where all of Israel's sins are forgiven," i.e., via the bringing of sacrifices. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "My son, do not be distressed, for we have a form of atonement just like it." And what is it? Acts of kindness, as it says in Psalms. "For I desire kindness, not a well-being offering."
So the well-being offering is the Shlemim offering. It's one of the korbanot described in the beginning of Leviticus, of Vayikra. And see what's happening here in the Avot of Rabbi Natan. What replaces sacrifice?
Acts of kindness, actual
chesed, right? Chesed replaces sacrifice, and so and not only does it replace sacrifice, but the rabbis, or at least Rabbi Natan, takes from Psalms a proof text of how important kindness is. That God creates the world on kindness, which, by the way, this is our theme for next year, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and for the following year, Olam Chesed Yibaneh, right? The world is built on kindness, right? And so the statement, what Rabbi Natan is saying here, is that not only does chesed replace the well-being offering, but don't think that I'm making this up, that I'm just saying that we have a replacement for the well-being offering. But if you go to Psalms, chesed is the very foundation on which the earth is created. And then he gives a story of Yochanan ben Zakkai when he left Jerusalem and Yeshua followed after him. So the two of them saw the temple being destroyed. And Yeshua says, oh, the temple's gone. Where are we going to bring the korbanot? How are we going to have our sins forgiven? There's no means now for atonement because there's no means for korban, for sacrifice. To which Rabbi Yochanan, not surprisingly, because remember what we said, he went out in a casket and he comes out of the casket and says, give me Yavna. He says, don't worry, don't be distressed. We have a form of kapara, we have a form of atonement that is just like korbanot, and that is chesed, kindness. And then he brings the psalm. He says, "It's I desire kindness, not the well-being offering." It's really profound. I'm watching the time, so let's move a little bit ahead here. Here's another text from the rabbis. This is from the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, which was codified around the year 500. It's from Babylonia, which was like the New York of the ancient world. One of the reasons why the Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, is more authoritative than the Yerushalmi is that all trade went through Babel. And it didn't go through Tiberia. The ancient world then was happening in what is today Iraq and Iran. And so here's this text from Masechet Sukkah. And we have this teaching of Rabbi Elazar, who says, what's the meaning of this verse from Micah? Human beings, you know what is good and what God requires of you. Justice, love mercy, and humility, walk humbly with your God. And then the rabbis take each piece. What does it mean to say do justly? It's justice. To love mercy, that's chesed. To walk humbly with your God, this is referring to taking the indigent dead for burial and accompanying a poor bride to a wedding canopy, and so forth and so on, to do things for people that are vulnerable in society. And it's just another way in which the rabbis are making the point that we don't have sacrifice today, but we do have acts that are, at the very least, equally in terms of their worth as sacrifice. But if you want to read it, and I think it's legitimate to read it, even go more. You can go more to it and say that they actually replace the korbanot. I'll ask you, if Mashiach comes and the temple's rebuilt, I'm not so sure we're going to go back to korbanot. I wouldn't know where to get a goat in order to do that. And so we are so beyond korbanot, so beyond the sacrificial system, other than a memory of our tradition. It's not clear to me that with the next paradigm shift that will happen. And you can see also here in this next text from Sota, further expiation about chesed. And this is one of the texts, by the way, that is in our Siddur at Birkot HaShachar. Do we have someone who would like to read? I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see if anybody's shaking their hand.
Rabbi, he explains, rather, the meaning is that one should follow the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He. He provides several examples. just as he clothes the naked, as it is written, and the Lord God made for Adam and his wife garments of skin and clothed them, so too should you clothe the naked. And just as the Holy One, blessed be he, visits the sick, as it is written with regard to God's appearing in Abraham following his circumcision, and the Lord appeared unto him by the tabernacles of Mamre, in Genesis 18:1, so too should you visit the sick. And just as the Holy One, blessed be he, consoles mourners, as is written, and it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed Isaac, his son, in Genesis 25:11, so too should you console mourners. And just as the Holy One, blessed be he, buried the dead, as it is written, and he was buried in the valley in the land of Moab, in Deuteronomy 34:6, so too should you bury the dead.
So what's the point of this text?
That we should be like God, that we should act in the manner of God's ways.
But why? But why? What's the point?
Because these are acts of chesed.
That's right. That chesed is so important that even God acts with chesed. And of course, the greatest form of flattery is imitation. And so if we have the divine spirit and God acts with chesed, so too should we act with chesed. That's how important it is for the rabbis. Now, as I said, this text is one of the texts that appears in our Siddur at the very beginning of the daily davening, right? Every day, right? This is one of the texts that we recite before Kaddish de Rabbanan, before the rabbis, the scholarly Kaddish, right? What is it the Siddur is saying by placing this text as part of our daily ritual?
It should be foremost in your mind. It's the first thing after Modeh Ani Levanecha and the other couple of prayers. This is the most important, even before avodah, even before sacrifice, so to speak.
That's exactly the point, right? In a time in which there is no sacrifice, chesed becomes one of the most important acts of worship and of approaching God. And here in this text in Sota, it's not only does chesed become one of the platforms, one of the foundations upon which the entire world is created, but chesed is the very act of being godly, of being God, or being like God. That's what chesed is, and that's why it's placed there. I'm going to talk about Ruth a little bit more tomorrow in my sermon, but here too, Shavuot, the center of Megillat Ruth is chesed. Naomi suffers tremendous loss in Moab. Her husband dies, her sons die. She's alone. She wants to go back home to Israel, and and she says to her daughters, "Don't come with me. Like, there's nothing for you there. First of all, you're Moabite, and Torah is not so fond of Moabite women. So don't come with me. There's no future for you there. And my lot is far bitter than yours. Stay here." And then what is it that Ruth replies in a tremendous act of chesed? "Don't urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. Right? Wherever you go, I'll go. Wherever you lodge, I'll lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried." It's a tremendous act of selflessness and of chesed, for which I'll talk more about tomorrow. Finally, in this discussion about the paradigm shift from Chorban Habayit, from the destruction of the temple, to the rise of the rabbis, we have this tremendous text from Menachot, also from the Babylonian Talmud. And here in this text, what you find is this is an Agadah, it's a legend. But the legend comes to tell us a very important, to make a very important point. Moses when he goes up to Mount Sinai and God is preparing the Torah to give to Moshe, Moses sees God is putting crowns on the letters of the Torah. So if you open the Torah, you read the Torah, you'll see that there's some letters that have crowns on them. And so Moses is curious. Ribono shel olam, Master of the Universe, who's preventing you from giving me the Torah without these additions, without these, swirly crowns? And God says to him, there's a man who's destined to be born after several generations. And Akiva ben Yosef is his name. Akiva is a very important character, as you can tell. He's destined to derive from each and every thorn, each and every one of these mounds upon mounds of halachot. Right? Akiva is going to look at these crowns, and from every one, he's going to learn something new. It's for his sake that the crowns, therefore, must be added to the Torah. So Moses then says to God, okay, Master of the Universe, Ribono shel olam, show him to me. So God said to Moses, return behind you. Right? This is the origin of that movie trick. When a person turns around and it's as if they've transported themselves through time and place. Return behind you. So Moses finds himself now in the 8th row of Rabbi Akiva's Beit Midrash, and Rabbi Akiva's teaching, and Moshe doesn't understand a single word that he's saying. Right? He doesn't understand anything that's going on. And then finally, when Akiva arrives at the discussion of one matter, his students say to him, my teacher, from where do you know this? How do you learn this? To which Akiva says, it's a halacha transmitted from Moses to Moses from Sinai. Remember back to Pirkei Avot. Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, and he passed it on to all these other people, including Rabbi Akiva. And when Moses heard this, his mind was put at ease, for this too was part of the Torah that he was to receive. What is the point that the rabbis are making in this Maaseh?
Continuity.
One is that there's continuity, that the rabbis are tying their authority to the Torah. There's continuity. The second point is that if Moses himself were alive at the time of Rabbi Akiva, he would not recognize the Judaism that they are teaching. So I would say to all the grandparents that don't understand the Judaism that their grandchildren are creating, don't worry about it. It'll be okay. And I'll say to all of us, as we are very likely entering, we know it. We've been entering this period for a while. We all talk about it. It usually is like, how do I get my kids and grandkids to be involved in the synagogue? Why is it they don't find what was familiar to me and comforting to me, comforting and familiar to them? That's usually how we talk about it. This trend of change and shift within our tradition has been in play for a long time. And the trauma of this pandemic is likely to lead to an emerging future that will take us in ways even further than what we sometimes find uncomfortable at this moment. But what I want to say to you is that it's okay. We're going to be okay, because we as a people have done this before. 2,000 years ago, with the trauma, the destruction of the temple, we reinvented Judaism. And that Judaism has guided us for the last 2,000 years. And those same values will guide us for the next period of time, as we struggle with what does it mean to be Jewish? What does it mean to have Torah? What does it mean to pray? What does it mean to learn? What does it mean to support a Jewish community based on these values in our generation that is being impacted in profound ways from the world in which we now live? With that, I'm going to stop and say Chag Sameach. I'm going to, in the Zoom, I'm going to make Rabbi Fryer Bodzin the host, and she's going to continue with her session in this Zoom, which are Songs of Ruth. Sorry. Rabbi Fryer Bodzin's is, what is yours?
How hope in our history and our tradition can inform our reality today.
Right. And then if you want to study with Professor Laura Weissman, that's a different Zoom link. But thank you very much for being here. And Rabbi Fryer Bodzin, I'm going to make you the host. And wish everyone a Chag Sameach. At 8:30, we will begin our live stream for Yontiv. Candle lighting is at 8:31. Rabbi, it's all yours.
Thanks. I put in, hi everyone, first of all. So good to see you.
Rabbi?
Yes, sir.
You should change your screen, your view to the speaker view, because that way when you speak, people will see you more directly.
Which one is that? The double or the single? That one?
The single. Use the single view.
This one or this one? Now I have no views.
That works.
But I don't see any of you now. Oh, there we are. Okay.
We see you.
Okay, we're good. Hi, everyone. I have been using a laptop for, I guess, 10 weeks. And so I am now on a 2-screen thing. And I got a little confused here where I'm at. Oh, here we go. Am I sharing my screen? Do you see a screen? Do people see a screen? Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Wonderful. Hi. Chag Sameach. It is so lovely to have this opportunity to learn with you this evening. I have called this class How Hope in Our History Can Inform Today's Reality. So while my dear friend and colleague, Reb Steve, taught about resiliency, I'm going to take us on a couple 1,000-year journey, and we're going to look at hope today. Actually, I'm going to keep us here another second. You know, we have been hoping and dreaming and praying since the biblical age. And so tonight, I'm going to share some examples of hope that are woven through our tapestry of Jewish texts and literature. Some of these will be familiar to some of you. Some of them will be familiar to probably nearly all of you. And then there might be some which are new and off the beaten track. I'm going to go a little bit more recent than the time of the Talmud. So the first text you might know from its melody. Shir hamalot b'shiv Adonai et shivatzi anayinu kecholmim. Az yimale sichok pinu ulshonenu rina. Az yamru vagoyim higdil Adonai lasotim ele. A song of ascents. When the Lord restores the fortune of Zion, we see it as in a dream. Our mouths shall be filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy. Then shall they say among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord will do great things for us, and we shall rejoice. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the water courses in the Negev. They who sow in tears shall reap with songs of joy. Though he goes along weeping, carrying the seed back, he shall come back with songs of joy, carrying his sheaves. So Psalm 126 is familiar to us. It's how we begin the benching. And it refers to a time when the Jewish people were in exile, which is most of our history, of course. But we eagerly looked ahead to redemption and the return to Eretz Yisrael. Until 1948, we really had no tangible evidence that we would ever get back. But yet, the people had faith. When the Lord restores the fortune of Zion, right? It's going to happen. It's going to be like a dream, and our dream is going to come true. Now, we joyfully sing this psalm on Shabbat and Yom Tov. We'll do it tonight if we ever get to dinner, just before Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meals, as we contemplate returning to the land and gratefully partaking in the produce of the field. But in the time when the psalmist wrote this, the people had faith and the people had hope. If they were in Babylonia, if they were in China, if they were in Morocco, if they were anywhere in the world, if they were in Spain, when there was no Israel, they still hoped and dreamed that they would get back to the land. I find it amazing that we still say this, you know? And I find it amazing that the way that we recite this in Birkat Hamazon is so different than it might have been pre-1948. When we sing it, it's a song, you know, it's part of benching. Oh, it's Yom Tov, oh, it's Shabbat, we have to do Shir HaMalot. But at the time, pre-48, this really was a hope. There really was a dream for a Shivat Zion. Can you just, even for a moment, imagine what it might have been like singing this in other eras? It was probably a very, very different experience, that they meant the words that they were singing in a much stronger way than we do today. So I wanted to start with this text with Psalm 126, A, because it's familiar, and B, because we're hopefully going to add it when we do Birkat Hamazon tonight and tomorrow and Shabbat at lunch too. But just to think for a moment when its meaning was much more, it's a nice word, I guess secure than it is right now, and definitely much deeper than it is right now. I don't know how to unmute people right now, so if there is someone in the building who is hearing me, come visit me in my office, because something really weird happened with my computer. Okay. Text number 2 I want to take us to is a much, much longer text. This might be one that's familiar to some people, and it might be less familiar to other people. It comes from the Talmud, from Ta'anit. And I've taught it actually at Beth Tzedec already once before. I taught it when I completed my Talmud study, when I did my Siyum, because it's one of the texts that just speaks over and over and delivers so many messages to us. So it's a story of Choni HaMa'agal, Choni the circle maker. And it begins like this. It's a little bit longer than the first one. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Yamav Shel Otot Tzadik, Haya Mitzta'er. Hi, how you doing? Al Mikra Zeh, Shir HaMalot, B'shuv Adonai et Shivat Zion, Hayinu Kecholmim. That's how it starts. 1 second, please. I don't know where the, I don't know how to get this down here. Sorry, guys, just wait 1 second.
I think you just take it, grab it, like you would, and move it.
Okay, never mind. No one needs to know what just how that was. Okay, we're good now? But now it's missing again.
You gotta hold your mouse over it. It disappears.
Okay, if anyone's chatting with me, I'm not going to be able to see that. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to be able to see it. Okay, all right, okay, we'll start again. Sorry about that, technical difficulties, and Zoom I've been doing for 10 weeks. It's the live stream that's gonna be new. Rabbi Yochanan tells a story that the entire life of Choni HaMa'agal, he said, I don't understand this verse, Shir HaMalot B'shuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kecholmim, which is how Psalm 126 just began a few moments ago. He said to himself, is there really a person who can dream and sleep and dream for 70 years? How is it possible to compare the 70-year exile in Babylonia to a dream? How do we do that? How can we be like dreamers? He didn't fully understand. So Choni HaMa'agal, he's a smart guy. He does a lot of interesting things that we might not consider to be typical, but for Choni, they work. One day he was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Choni said to him, this tree, after how many years will it bear fruit? The man said to him, it will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed. Choni said to him, is it obvious to you that you will live 70 years, that you expect to benefit from this tree? He said to him, that man himself found a world full of carob trees. And just as my ancestors planted for me, I too am planting for my descendants. Choni has hope. Choni believes that he will have descendants, first of all, and he believes that he's going to leave something for his descendants. It wasn't an easy time. Life expectancy was not in the mid-80s at that time. He never knew what could happen to him, and Choni doesn't have so much muzzle anyways, and through the rest of his stories. But here he is with a little bit of hope. So Choni, he sat and he ate bread, and slept overcame him, and he slept. And now here's a moment of the phantasm that you can find in the Talmud. A cliff formed around him, and he disappeared from sight, and he slept for 70 years. Halavai, we could have a long one night's sleep, never mind 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a certain man gathering carobs from that tree. Choni said to him, are you the one who planted this tree? The man said to him, I am his son. Choni said to him, I can learn from this that I have slept for 70 years. Because indeed, he saw that the donkey had sired herds during those years. So what do we learn about Choni? Choni might have fallen asleep, but he got up. There might have been times where he was dormant, where he was quiet, but he planted this tree that would be enjoyed by generations to come. He had hope that there would be a future. You don't have hope in the future unless you have a sense of optimism and unless you know there's going to be a future. Choni had no reason to plant the carob tree. Choni had no reason to be a dreamer, but he had the hope. If we take Choni as one person and we expand him, we can learn that the Jewish people have never fallen asleep. We've always dreamt big, hoping for a return to our homeland. And it's something that just didn't happen until our time. You know, our people's deep sense of hope is what carried us from the year 1970, from the year 70 until the year 1948. That's a long time to have hope and not give up hope. Just like we've also been hoping and waiting for the Mashiach for so long, this was hoping for the land of Israel. Okay, does everyone see text 3 now? Give me a thumbs up if you see text 3. Anyone? Thank you. Okay, I don't know how many screens there are, so someone gave me one. I appreciate it. We're going to go more on message as Ruth is the Megillah that is connected to this holiday. And I'm just looking at two different, thanks Mitch. I'm just looking at two different verses here. It's from chapter 1. Vatomer Naomi, Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might be husbands for you? You know, kids are dead. Like what's this daughter-in-law doing with her? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, there's that word, hope. Even if I were married tonight and I also bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you, on their account, debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. Now, unmute everyone if I can. Unmute. Oh. Or I invite anyone to unmute. What do you think Naomi could have done instead of saying it's not going to work out? What could Naomi have done that was different? Anyone, shout it out.
Bring her back to Israel and do what she wound up doing, finding a shidduch for them.
Right, right. But she didn't think there was any hope. She thought, thanks, Jerome. She thought, I'm here on my own now. I don't have anything. There's no hope. I'm not gonna have a relationship, even with another woman, like a daughter-in-law relationship. I'm not going to flourish. She gave up. She didn't really have reason to have hope in her immediate future and her immediate reality because everyone around her had been dying. But I still think that what we see here is an example of what not to do, right? I think that hope can surpass what we think is possible. Now, I realize I'm sounding like, a televangelist guru right now, but if we have hope in what we don't think is possible, it might happen. I want you to just take a moment and think back in your lives of examples of that. When something you had hope for, you didn't really think it would happen, and then it happened. It's really, really powerful. I know that, I don't know if any of you know her, for at least 20 years, my mother had hope that I would return to Toronto. And then it happened, right? Sometimes hope works, and it's a powerful experience to have. Okay, next text. The next text is out of season, I would say. It's out of date. It's from Psalm 27, which we recite in the months of Elul, the month before Rosh Hashanah, and then in the beginning of Tishrei as well. It's near the end. It's Kaveh el Adonai, Chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. Hope in the Lord. Kaveh, like tikva, be strong and of good courage, and hope in the Lord. Have hope in the Lord. It's from Psalms. Why do you think that this verse is in the psalm that we recite in the month before Rosh Hashanah? You can unmute yourselves now with the new, Zoom rules. Anyone? Why would this verse be something that we would say every day, twice a day before Rosh Hashanah and during that first couple weeks of Tishrei?
We're hoping to get through the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur.
Right.
For another year.
Right. Yes, we're hoping to get through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and a whole other year. But what do we do during this season?
Repent.
Repent, right. And what's the conversation we have? We ask people to accept, we try and do tshuva with other people. And we hope that God will be there as our guiding light as we make the right decisions during this month. Text 5, you guys can still see it, I hope. It's on the same page. This is where the rabbis take this text. Amar Rabbi Chama b'Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Chanina, said, a person who prayed and saw that he was not answered should pray again. As it is stated, Kaveh el Adonai, Chazak v'yametz libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. As it is stated, hope in the Lord, be strong and of courage, and hope in the Lord. One should turn to God with hope, and if necessary, turn to God again with hope. This particular text, I feel it on such a deep level. Yeah. Sometimes if you're asked something of God, God says, not yet. Or God says, maybe tomorrow, which is a more humorous way of what we see here. Keep turning to God for hope. This is what our rabbis did 2,000 years ago. They kept turning to God. If it didn't work one day, they would hope that it would work tomorrow. Hopefully you're seeing, as we're going through these texts, this theme of hope. It really resonated for our ancestors. If you have any comments, please put them in the chat. This next text, I'm just throwing it in because I love it. In Bracha, near the very, very beginning of the Talmud, like 17 pages in or 16 pages in, there's a whole bunch of paragraphs of what the rabbis would say when they would leave the Beit Midrash, when they would leave the house of study. One rabbi says, this is what you say. One rabbi says, that's what you say. But this is what this rabbi said. When the sages who had been studying there took leave of the study hall, so when the rabbis would leave the Beit Midrash, maybe it was the study hall of Rabbi Ami, maybe it was Rabbi Hanina. The truth is, it doesn't matter. They would say the following blessing to him. May you see your world. May you benefit from all the good in the world in your lifetime. And may your end be to live or to life in the world to come. And may your hope be sustained for many generations. May your heart meditate understanding. May your mouth speak wisdom and your tongue whisper with praise. So we see the word hope there again, right? May your hope be sustained for many generations. May your life make it to Olam Haba. May your mouth and your tongue say all the right things, but hope is thrown in there in these essential blessings that the rabbis would give one another as they left the study house, as they left the Beit Midrash. Very, very, very powerful text here. That if the rabbis would be studying all day long, right? They'd study all day long. At the end, they would remember that their hope in God would be sustained for many, many generations, or their hope in a positive reality or in a positive life. Another beautiful one. Okay. Next text. You might have seen this in a book that Ron Wolfson wrote. Ron Wolfson, who was here when Reb Steve and I were installed. The 7 questions you're asked in heaven. I haven't actually been in my office for 2.5 months. I don't remember where all my books are, but I'm sure it's here somewhere. He has a book that's really based on this little text, and it's wonderful. And there's this text in Shabbat, in the 2nd book of the Talmud, that says, "B'sha'ah shemachnisin adam ladin," when a man is brought before the heavenly court, at the end, these are the questions that a person is asked. Were you trustworthy in business? Now you can look at that in the small words or also the big. You can look at it in literal or metaphorical. Were you trustworthy in any of the business that you did or any of your relationships? Did you set time for Torah study? Did you try to have kids, which could also be, did you help raise children, which is how I've always understood it? Did you hope for the Mashiach? Did you argue intelligently? And did you understand things based on other things? Okay. So at the end, on your way in, before you can pass go to get into Olam Haba, to get into the world to come, one of the questions you're asked is, did you have hope that there would be a Mashiach? Did you have hope? Did you believe that no matter how crappy your life was or how hard it was to be a Jew at that time, did you have hope that there would be a Messiah? It's a beautiful, beautiful text. Okay, so these are all the old texts that I've looked at. And old, I mean, less than 150 years ago. Now we're going to move to about 130-ish years ago. So I'm acknowledging I am completely skipping over the medieval phase. Golden Age of Spain, the Gaonic period, none of that is there. And I'm going to take us to a text that every single one of us potentially knows. Familiar? It's Hatikva. If I'm teaching a shiur now, a class about hope, and I didn't include Hatikva, what would I be doing wrong is the question. And I want to thank Terry, who actually put in this unbelievable graphic. I did not have it. So thank you, Terry, for that, if you're listening wherever you are. This is what the words of Hatikva mean, if you've ever taken a moment to look at it in English. as long as in the heart within the soul of a Jew still yearns, and onwards towards the end of the east, an eye still gazes towards Zion, our hope is not yet lost. I'm one of those people who always cries in Hatikva, so just give me a moment here. The 2,000-year-old hope to be a free nation in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. So what do we know about Hatikva? I just want to give you an aside. On Yom HaAtzmaut, between everything that we did at Beth Tzedec and other things that I participated in online, and then watching my daughter at RHA, I heard Hatikva 6 different times. I lost it. It was such an emotional basket case from hearing Hatikva 6 different times. I just wanted to throw that out there. Okay. So I want to thank my colleague, Rabbi Rob Scheinberg. He actually got his doctorate this week, or last week, so I will call him Rabbi Dr. Rob Scheinberg in Hoboken, that did this research on Hatikva a number of years ago. He wrote that Hatikva was originally written in 1878. So that's before 48, many, many years. I don't do math. We're not going to talk about it. And it was part of a 9-stanza poem that was written by Naftali Hertz Imber. Maybe that part you know. After he read a small piece in a Jewish newspaper that said, for the first time in hundreds of years, there were to be Jewish farmers who would be working the land of Israel. Right? So 1978, Aliyah had begun. They were starting to, get rid of malaria and do all the stuff we learned with the eucalyptus. And suddenly there were Jewish farmers in Israel, those chalutzim. Maybe some of you or your parents or your grandparents were those people. We've seen the pictures of them. Naftali Hertz Imber, he read a little article about that, and he was very, very surprised. He, at the time, was a young Romanian Jewish poet. He was in his early 20s, and he was legitimately surprised by this news article. It's like one of those news articles where you hear that there's a Jewish community in some place that you'd never expect it to be. That's what this was like. Because Israel in the 1870s looked nothing like it does in 2020, obviously. Think back to your first trip to Israel, if you've had the zchut to go to Israel, to compare to what it looks like now. Like the first time I went to Israel was 1993. 1993 and 2020 is completely different. It has completely moved up in so many ways. So if any of you watching were there in the 60s or the 50s or the 40s, compare that Israel to your most recent trip. And if you haven't been, just think of pictures that you've seen. It just was not the startup nation. Maybe they were Jaffa oranges, I don't know. But it was poor. There were very few Jews in the 1870s. And if they were, the only place really were in the walls of Jerusalem or maybe just starting to go out. And in the article, Imber read that the Jews had purchased land not far from the Mediterranean Sea with the intention of establishing an agricultural community that would be called, take a moment to think of Israeli cities you might know of that have the word tikva in it. Danny Zimmerman, say it out loud.
Jaffa?
Not Jaffa, but nearby, Petach Tikva. The opening, the route to Tikva, or the gateway to hope, it's really nice. And so Naftali Hertz Imber, he was just amazed by both the idea of the Jewish community's commitment to transform and revive itself, and also by choosing this name, Gateway to Hope, Petach Tikva. And so he responded the way you would expect a young poet to respond to an event. He basically, went to TikTok or posted something on Instagram, which didn't exist back then. So he wrote a poem. He was moved to the core by this idea that there are Jews coming to Israel, and we've only been dreaming and having hope about it for the last so many, many years. His poem was actually called, this is, higher level Yom HaAtzmaut knowledge. The actual poem was called Tikvatenu. It wasn't called Hatikva. The word Tikvatenu, our tikva, is in Hatikva. And he was just so moved by the hope that these Jewish pioneers, which was an oxymoron back then. Now we can picture a chalutz, but back then there was nothing. He was just so moved by the hope that they had that was being transformed into action. They were actually taking the steps of their hope. Seeing other people actualize their hope inspired him. And he showed all of us that hope is infectious. If you want to know more information about that, just let me know another time and I'll let you know. So I'm trying to go chronological here. The next text is a little harder to read. It's from the Eish Kodesh. The Eish Kodesh was Rabbi Kalanimus Kalman Shapira, who was born in 1889 and he died in 1943. He was also known as the Piazetzna Rebbe. He gained a reputation for how he taught, and he argued that a child must be brought up with a vision of his own potential greatness. And he was one of the rabbis of the Shoah. And he argued always for positive, psychologically sensitive, joyous educational methods. So this is his piece from the Piazetzna Rebbe, the Eish Kodesh. It is clear. Hold on. I also want you to acknowledge this was written during the Shoah, during the war. It is clear, amidst all this suffering, that if only everyone knew that they would be rescued tomorrow, then a great majority, even those who have already despaired, would be able to find courage. The problem is that they cannot see any end to the darkness. Many find nothing with which to bolster their spirits. And so, God forbid, they despair and become dispirited. This is the meaning of be sincere with God, your Lord. Even if you are broken and oppressed, nevertheless, be artless and whole. Take strength in God, your Lord, because you know that God, your Lord, is with you in your suffering. Do not attempt to project into the future saying, I cannot see an end to the darkness, but simply accept whatever happens to you, and then you will be with God, to be God's portion. Then naturally, your salvation will draw close, as Moshe said, Vehem imcha v'nachlatecha, and they are your people and your inheritance. That's a hard text. And if any of you are children of survivors, it's an even harder text to read. But the text speaks to the reality that sometimes we're hopeless to change the actual circumstances of our fate, but we transform our personal tragedy into triumph. It's like Viktor Frankl, who wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, and you don't have this text because I thought of it after. We must never forget that we may also find meaning in life, even when confronted with a hopeless situation, when facing a fate that cannot be changed. How does this text from the Eish Kodesh relate to cultivating hope? Anyone? Just unmute yourself if you have a thought. So, a couple years ago, I was blessed to see Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway with the original cast. And if I think of Nice Jewish Boy Ben Platt as Evan, even in your darkest night, you are not alone and you will be found. It's the same message that comes straight from the Eish Kodesh. That to have that spark of hope, it might move you, it might propel you, at least into a different psychological space. I hope this helped other people that he knew at that time. All right. It almost seems unfair to go from the text we just went to this next text, but that's okay. This next text is from one of my favorite Israeli singers, modern, David Broza. If you've heard him at any time in the last 10 weeks in any of the specials that he's been part of, he's actually sung this song. It's called Yeh Tov, which means it will be okay. He originally wrote it with Yonatan Geffen like 30-ish years ago, and then he started changing the words for the last stanza here and there. I have seen David Broza more often than I have seen Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And at CSN, I've seen probably about, 17 times. David Broza, we're on the other side of 20 at this point. And so I've heard him give the spiel of how he added this stanza so many times. But it just fits in for where we are today. Yeh Tov means it's going to be okay. That's what it means. Tov is good. It's going to be good. It's going to be okay. And he added this verse on the eve of the 1977 peace negotiations with Egypt. Remember when we thought that was difficult? Hopes were totally running high, and there was a feeling of optimism in the air. And this is how he ends all of his concerts now. Od nilmad lichyot biyachad ben chorshot atzei zeitim Yeladim yichyu bli fachad bli gvulot bli miklatim Al kvarim yifrach ha'esev L'shalom ve'ahava Mea shanim shel cherev Ve'od lo avda hatikva. We will yet learn to live together beneath the groves of olive trees. Children will live without fear, without borders, without bomb shelters. On graves, grass will grow for peace and love. 100 years of war. Ve'od lo avda hatikva. But we have still not lost our hope. Get rid of our COVID situation right now and just put ourselves in Israel, which was the issue we all, put all of our focus on for so long before we had as much reason to think of a personal, Canada-wide, worldwide. We care about this stuff. We care about peace. And every single concert that David Broza ends, he ends with this section, that we have not yet lost hope. And so his message, which I don't think young people are listening to him right now as a favorite singer, but a whole lot of us are, we still hear this of not losing hope. So I have one last text. Actually, before I do, just imagine you're at a concert hall, really, really big or really, really little, because I've seen him do both. And imagine, they're probably mostly Jewish, because it's Israeli. They all sing at the end, Od lo avda hatikva. We have not yet lost our hope. The title of the song says it all. Yeh Tov. I get asked a lot, how am I doing? I'm sure the rest of you do too. For those of you that speak to me often, you've probably heard me say super duper, because I don't know what else to say. But sometimes I also say, Yeh Tov. It'll be okay. We're going to be all right. So the final text that I want to share is from my teacher, from my rabbi, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson in Los Angeles, the dean of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies. And this is from one of his books, Passing Life's Tests. And he wrote, and I'm a student of his, 100%. Our challenge has always been to recognize reality as it is, while simultaneously working to transform reality into what it ought to be. Recognize reality as it is, and at the same time, doing what we can to change it into what it ought to be. Hope is the engine that drives us to build the life that we want. Sometimes it prompts actions, but other times it remains just below the surface, but it gives us the strength to keep on going. Sometimes our hope is going to get us out there, and sometimes it's just going to keep us there. It's going to keep us moving. So we've just gone through a couple thousand years of texts about hope. And I hope that some of them resonated for you, because we have some rough days. We have some rough hours. We have some rough moments. We don't know what's going to do. You know, we thought by now we'd be able to join together in groups of 10, and we're not. But I have hope that things are going to change, and that when Cantor Ezer and Reb Steve and I look out, I have hope that we're going to be looking at other people and not just the pews. I have hope that we're going to move to a different kind of normal. I have hope that we're going to walk outside and actually smile at each other, not with our eyes, but with our whole faces, and we're not going to be covered with masks. And I have hope because my tradition teaches me to have hope, that in the worst of times, we've always had this hope that has carried us. Hope carries me on my challenging days, and my prayer and my blessing for you is that it will carry you as well. Any questions? I'd love to entertain them based on the text that we've looked at. You guys are a quiet group. Hope I didn't stun you too much. Wow, nothing. Okay. If there's no questions then, at 8:30 tonight, I invite you to join us on our live stream as we lead Mari. And with that, I'm going to end the screen sharing, if I can figure out how to do that. And I'm going to say good night to you all. See you at 8:30.
Chag Sameach.
Oh, there people are. Chag Sameach. I knew you were there somewhere. Chag Sameach. Stop.